So thank you for being here on this gorgeous, it is gorgeous out there, isn't it? Oof, hard to be inside this morning, a little bit. I'd like to start off by thinking and sharing this. I actually think that we have a problem today. And as I talk to people, especially this past week, many people would say we'd be lucky if we only had one, right? we have a number of problems, but I believe we do have one primary problem, and I think maybe it's not a problem, maybe it's a challenge, but I believe that challenge or that problem is this. I think that we don't believe that each and every one of us have a divine origin. Or to put it in another way, I don't think we actually believe that you and I are children of the living God. I just don't think we do. It's easy to say that, yes, I'm a child of God, or yes, you're a child of God. But if we believed it, I really think that the world that we know would actually be immediately and utterly transformed. And I mean that immediately, if we really believed it. Because you see, if I'm a child of God, so then by your very birth, you're a child of God as well. And if you're a child of God, so is every person in your immediate family, and every person in your extended family, and all the families of those extended families, and the person who lives next door to us, and the person who lives across town, or across the country, or even in another part of the world, right? It also would mean that the person standing on the street corner begging or flying a sign, as we say, or the person dying of cancer, or the alcoholic who's dying of liver failure in the hospital, or the addict who's dying from addiction, they too are children of God. And that would mean that the person who's suffering, either publicly or privately, from mental illness or battling any substance use disorder, is also a child of God. And it would also mean that the person who's fleeing persecution in another country and has to cross our border without proper documentation is a child of God. And it means that every person who finds themselves incarcerated in our nation for whatever reason is also a child of God. But you see, I believe we say it, but we don't actually believe it. And I'll be the first to admit I'm among you as well. I wish I could say that I treat and see every person I meet as a child of God. But if I'm to be honest with you and with myself, there are people who I find it very hard to be with and to be around. So what can we do? What can we do? What are some of the tangible, relevant things that we can begin to do that will further the reign of God in our lives? First, I think we can do exactly what the gospel and exactly what Jesus said to the people to do. Stop grumbling. Stop grumbling. Just because this infinite, vast, and immeasurable and incomprehensible God doesn't seem to act or to behave in the manner that fits in the box that you and I have created for God, doesn't mean that God isn't listening, or in fact, maybe it means that you and I are too busy grumbling to be listening. Secondly, so we can stop grumbling. Secondly, we can, when we're presented with people in our lives who really challenge us to treat them as a child of God, we could stop for just a moment. We could stop and remember that everyone is a child of God. And while everyone is indeed a child of God, all behaviors and all words are not necessarily godly, right? So we don't need to place ourselves in the midst of people who are not behaving godly or speaking godly. We simply need to remember that they are indeed a child of God and move on. Jesus did that very same thing. If it was the scribes or the Pharisees or the temple authorities, he didn't stick around with them a lot. Jesus did eat and dine with those who, maybe like us, didn't always get it or didn't always get it right, but were willing to admit that we might stumble more often than we triumph. So, secondly, We can admit that everyone is a child of God, but we don't need to necessarily stick around. And third and finally, I think the one thing we can do is walk away from conversations that are treating others like they are less than a child of God. The minute we hear words like they or them or those people, we might want to check ourselves and see if stepping away from that conversation might just be the healthiest thing that we can do, both spiritually and emotionally. It might be the healthiest thing that we can do for the reign of God. It's precisely what Paul said in his reading to the Ephesians. If you missed the line, he said this: try to imitate God as beloved children. I love this line. Walk in love as Christ loved us. Simple, right? Walk in love as Christ loved us. My friends, we are all saints in the making. We are all divine stardust of creation. We are all children of the living God. If we only start treating each other that way, we literally could bring about the kingdom of God and, in fact, the second coming of Christ. Now that would be truly remarkable, don't you think?